Hi, my name is Ruth and I'm a software engineer. The purpose of this video is to sort of show my approach on how I handle um, accomplishing tasks or goals or whatever needs to get done within an application. In this case, I've created this data structure in which the goal or the task for this is to populate the database with some very minimal data to use for an application in the front end. So I have this data structure here, and so my goal is to seed it, and so this script right here is to iterate through these objects and populate the database with that data. So we'll just go ahead and get started with that. So let's split this to the right so we can have, and we'll just grab a little bit more. Alright. So this is our data and we want to go through here, and so my approach on usually how I like to do it is sort of have a game plan for it. We can probably, so if we think about it, if we iterate through the array, right, then we're going to have access to each of these objects. And then, even though illness is just one value, we have medications that we will have to iterate through as well with an array. So we might need to do like 2 for loop iterations, looking at seeing that this is an array, so we would have to iterate through that as well. So let's start with okay, so iterate through the illness medication data, right? Now how we want to do it is we want to have access to illness. So if we say like, so if we do for, this is a list, right? I don't think I can do, I don't think I can use items. I think items is only on objects. Let's see, let's see, Python, items, objects, version for this. You might be looking for a way to iterate over a list and get both the index and value of each item, similar to how items works for dictionaries. I don't necessarily care for the index, the value is going to be in the object. So if we do, so we would say like for, since it doesn't seem to, because I really don't care for the index, to be honest. So I think what we have to do is either convert the data set or the data structure to be able to use items. That might be ideal, but let's just go through this with the way it is for now and say for, and we'll just call it like object in illness medication data, right? And then we will want to take that object, so now we have access to this object here, and we can say like for here I think we could then say illness medications in object. So that's already the second loop, and then we would have to do for medication and medications. So that's already 3 loops deep in. And I am not a fan of that. I think we can reduce it to maybe 2, at least remove one extra iteration if we convert the data. If we convert this into a different data structure. So I'm guessing, or not guessing, but I'm thinking instead of having like the illness and the medications like this, we can probably have it as where it's like respiratory, like convert it into something like respiratory, and then have the medications as the value. So like, you know, an array of, and then like medications. You know, oops. Something like this. That way we can have our first loop, and then the list will have our second loop, and we can get rid of the third loop, or the extra loop here. So what we'll probably want to do then in that case is you might want to create a function to convert the data structure to something like follow, right? So I want to do, actually it'll be easier if I just do it here, something like, for example, take this and take this as the value. So take that. So something like that, right? Where we have the illness as the key and the medication as the value, the list of medications as its value. So once we have our data structure like this, right, then we want to loop through here, right? So we could say once data structure is converted, iterate through it. Now when we are going to, when we iterate through it, so say for illness medications in, I won't say converted, I'll just say converted data for now. We have the illness, right? We have the name of the illness, and then we have the medication. So here we would say for medication in medications. Now, the goal is to do a couple of, it's to populate the database, right? And so in here, in this table, we have illness ID and medications ID. Now we want to use the illness medications model. This model has, if we go in here, it has a couple of methods. One of them is this create row method, in which it will take the illness and the medication instance, and it will then create the record in the database. One of the important things to keep in mind is probably to make sure that we don't want, like if the record already exists, we don't want it to be created again. So in order to make sure that the medication is already or to make sure that medication doesn't already exist in the illness medications table, we want to check if medication exists in illness medication, right? So we'll definitely want to confirm that. So it'll probably be ideal to create function to check if medication exists in illness medication. So that will probably require a query. So yeah, we'll probably think about that a little more when we get there. So we want to check if medication exists in the illness medications, and then we'll say here, if medication exists, we really don't want to do anything, and if medication doesn't exist, then create the record, right? So now that we have sort of an outline or an idea of how we want to go about this, we no longer want to iterate through that. We want to create a function to convert the data structure. Let's create a function that converts our data from this to this. So let's go ahead and do def convert data, and it's going to receive a list. So then we want to, so let's break it down in here. We're going to receive a list, and we're going to iterate through the list. We want to take the illness value and set it as key, and then we want to take the medications value and set it as the value to the illness. Probably would create an empty dictionary to add new object, or to add I'll just create an empty dictionary. So we'll say new data here. We will say for because it's a dictionary, for dictionary and list, we want to add the it's called illness, so we want to have the illness as the value, as the key, and then we want to have the medications as a value. And then we'll probably want to return, but before we return the new data, let me make sure that it is converting the way that I want it to be. So here, data. So let's go ahead and call this. Pass in the illness medications data. Actually, I think we need to illness medication data, export that, and pass it in. Here, we'll say, what is it, Python, put in the script, c dot, what's the name, medication. Medication. So it looks kind of ugly, but it is an object. We have respiratory infection as the string, and then we have the array as the value. So it looks like it worked. So now we want to return new data. We'll delete this. I'll delete this extra stuff. Alright, so say steps. Step 1. I'll say we have completed that. Now we want to do this thing. Okay, so once data structure is converted, iterate through for illness, medication. Okay, so now we have to use with app context. And we'll say new illness medication data. And then we'll call it converted data. And we'll pass in the illness medication data. So that should give us what we are wanting. You converted data. Awesome. Okay, so now that we have this, right, we want to iterate through it. So for illness, medications, and new illness medication data, just like we did up here, for medication and medications. Get rid of this. For medication and medications, check if medication exists in illness medications. Alright, so let's just do a query. So my original thinking was if we were to like query the database, query the database to get a to get the collection. Well, basically, like query the database to get all the records in illness medication. Like right now, there's nothing in there. So the array is going to be empty. And if it's empty, well, actually, yeah, that does work. So if it's empty, right, then that means that you can proceed to create the record. So I think it might be ideal to do that. So we can basically say illness medication collection, and do illness medication dot query dot all. Alright. And then, so we have that. Now in the database, we have medication ID and the illness ID. So in order to check to see if that medication does exist, we will need to find the ID of that medication. because we only have the name of the medication, we don't have the ID. So then we will have to query the database again to find that medication. So in here we'll say like query medication table in database. So query medication table in database to get the medication ID. And then we will then need to query the, oh wait, so then once we have the ID, we would have to look for the illness medication collection. We would have to basically iterate through illness medication collection to check if the medication exists. So now we're doing another for loop. So we're doing another iteration here. And we're going to do this iteration for each medication, which is probably not, though you don't want to do that. So instead of actually having that iteration in here, we're going to abstract it out to its own function. So in this case, probably be better to create a function to check if medication exists in the illness medication collection. Alright, so query medication table in database to get the medication ID. So right here we can have let's name this medication name so that there won't be no name conflict, and we can do medication, or actually we'll just do medication TP, so we'll know that is from the database, and we can say medication dot query dot filter by, and we want to filter by, let me see, what is the attribute on medication? Is a model, is a medication name. So we would say name would be the medication name. And then we'll do dot first, like that, right? Now this is going to be querying the database, the number of times of medications there are in this medication array. So then it'll probably be better, instead of querying the database individually like that, to get just a list of all the medications. It's looking, okay. Medications collection. And so medication dot query dot all. Okay. So instead of doing this, we will use medication collections to look for, but since we're gonna have to iterate through it, so we will have to iterate through medications to find the medication instance, because the medication instance holds the ID. So the medication instance will hold the ID, and we will use that ID to then look for this. So iterate through medications to find the medication's instance, for access to medication ID. Alright, so let's go back to the beginning. We are iterating through the illness medication data, and then we're iterating through the medications, and we want to make sure that the medication doesn't have a record already in the illness medications table. So we are getting iterating through medications to find the medication instance, which will then give us access. It will give us the medication ID that we can then check against the illness medication table collection to see if that already exists. I hope that makes sense so far. Since we're going to be iterating through medications again in here, do I still have? Okay, cool. You might want to create a function we might want iterate through medications to find the medication instance so that we can have access. So we have access to medication ID. So we want to find the instance. So this function, create a function to return the medication instance. And once we have that instance, we will use it to access the ID number, in which we will then look to see if we will then use that ID to see if it exists in the illness medications collection. And then once we do that, if we look up here, we want to see if medication exists, do nothing. If medication doesn't exist, create the record. So basically, take this, or I should say create record if medication is not found in illness, if medication ID is not found in illness medication collection. Now to create the record, we need this is the medication model. To create the record in illness medication, we need the illness instance and medication instance. So we will probably need to create the record. We need the illness instance, and we'll just say illness and medication instance. I don't think I need this anymore. So we want to, okay, let's see, we're looping through, right, and saying for medication in medications, we want to query the medication table in the database to get the medication ID. Actually, we don't want to do this anymore because we are not doing individual querying. We want to iterate through medications collection to find the medication instance so we have access to medication ID, right? So iterate through medications collections to find the medication instance so we have access to the ID. So we'll create a function to return the medication instance. Then iterate through illness medication collection to check if medication exists. So then to do this, we will create a function that will do that for us. And then we want to create the record if it doesn't exist. So if we were to go about doing this now, we're going to create these two functions now. So let's create the first one. First one is to find the medications instance. So we'll say retrieve record. We are going to give it the list. So for now, we have the list. Let's say or it is Eliana's. Okay, cool. So retrieve record, and we want, if we break it down in here, we want to iterate through the list, find the instance that matches the medication name, so we'll probably have to pass the name of the medication, and then we want to return the medication instance. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say for instance in list, if well, we need to, because the instances are, the list is an array of instances, so we need to find that instance, and so we need to get adder. How does get adder work again? So you pass in the instance, and then you pass in the attribute name. So let's say the instance and then the attribute name. So we would probably have to pass. So we could just something like that. But I mean, I think we can just pass the attribute as a argument. That would be ideal. If it matches name, then we want to return that instance. Right. So let's go ahead and retrieve record. Let's test this. We're gonna give it the attribute name. We're going to give it a medication name, so let me see what's a medication name. Give it this medication name. So we'll give it a medication name like this, and then we'll give it the converted with this. String object has no attribute name. That's fair. Wait, we're not giving it the right. Oops. No. Because we want to retrieve the record from here, from illness medication collection. So we're gonna actually have to call this. I'll just call it here. And pass it this. to print. What? This didn't even say you. Oh, I forgot. You have to actually do all of this within the. Let's try this again. Too many values. Wait, what? For illness medication. Too many values to unpack. Oh. Alright, it gave us none. So awesome. It returned none. Now, which is true, because there is nothing in the database at this moment. So now that we have created the retrieve record function, so this is complete. Now we have to create the this function. And we'll create it here. So def, we'll say has record. We're gonna give it the medication instance, and then we're gonna give it the we give it the list, the illness medication collection list, right? And okay, so let's break down this function now. So we want to iterate through the list. We want to medication. We want to find the ID match. So in this case, like, we want to find the match for medication. Or we want to find a match between the medication instance ID. We want to find a match between the medication instance ID and the medication ID list. And then we don't I don't think we just want to see if it's in there, right? Like, we already have the medication instance. We don't need the instance of it to be returned. We don't need the instance of this record, like illness ID. We just want to see, like, does it exist in there or not, right? So let's say, like, it might be okay to just return true or false, because, like, does it have a record or not? That's all I want to know. Alright, so return true if record exists, and then return false if record doesn't exist, right? So let's go ahead and iterate through this. So you're going to say for instance in list if, and since this is going to be an instance, if we want to we want access to the medication ID in this list, in the illness medication list. So if we pass in the instance, and then we pass in attribute, so we probably want to pass the attribute anytime. So instance and the attribute. In this case, like, it would be medication ID attribute, right? So if it equals medication instance dot ID. Actually, I think I'm gonna just pass in the ID, right? I think I could just do that instead of passing the whole instance. I don't think I need the whole instance, whole medication instance. I just need the ID. So medication ID. I'll just pass in the medication ID. Now, if there's a match, return true. Else, if there's no match, then just return none. Or I guess we can return false. Non-false, they evaluate to the same thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and test the function, make sure that it is working the way that we want it to work. So we'll go in here, and then we'll say as record, and the attribute in this case will actually be medication ID. In this case, the value would be, we would need to get the ID from the medication instance. So technically in here, we would basically have retrieved the record already. So I'll just pass 1. I'll just do that just for now, because I mean there's nothing in there, so we should get false. So let's see that, and then we're passing in the medication collection. So this is just to check that this works. So we're getting false. I will have to then, once we populate the database, I'll have to try to populate it again to make sure that it doesn't repeat to make sure that it will return true if it already exists. But for now, since there's nothing populated in the database, it's just gonna return false. Which is the result that we want currently. Alright, so that worked great. Awesome. So let's go ahead and delete all of this. Oops, not that. And we have successfully completed and created a function for that. Okay, so now that we've done this, we need to create record if medication ID is not found in the medications collection. Create the record. So, alright, sweet. So let's go ahead and implement these things right here. Now that we've created these functions, and we are extracting the iteration to do it like in their own functions. We've avoided having like the nesting for loops in here, which would have made it really difficult to program, really difficult on the eyes. Okay, so probably actually let's try to remember what we need to do. So this, actually just delete the create functions part, right? Because that. Okay, so we want to probably rewrite this. So for every, actually let's just do this. So for every medication, let's see, find the the medication instance. Use the medication instance to access the ID, the ID of the current medication that's in the current loop. And then use the medication, access the ID, or call the, find the medication, just say call, retrieve, record, function, to find the medication instance, use the medication instance to access the ID of the current medication that is in the current loop. That is very confusing. Why did I write that? It made sense while I was writing it. But okay, so once we have that, we want to then call the has record function to check function has the medication ID to check if the medication already exists in illness medication collection, right? And then we want, and then we want to create an if statement with the condition returned from the has record function, right? So to create the record, we need the illness and medication instance. We will need to get the have the illness, so we will probably query in here, because we will by the time we get here, we will already have the medication instance, since it's going to be retrieved in here, but we haven't done anything with the illness. So we would say, so in here we will query the database to retrieve the instance, the illness instance. And create it. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement this. So iterate through medications. Wait. Okay. So one step at a time. So here, we will say retrieve, or we're going to do medication, medication instance. I'm going to say retrieve record. We're going to pass the attribute name. Attribute is name. We're going to pass the medication name, and we're going to pass in the medication collection. Right. Now, again, because we don't have anything in our database currently, we're not really going to have anything returned to us. So we should, but we still should get a value. So like, I think it would probably be good if we have it return if there is no matches. So let's go ahead and do this. So medication instance. Okay, so now that we have that, right, so now we have the medication instance, we want to iterate through this collection. We want to retrieve, or actually, that's iterate through medication collection. Function to find the medication. We already did this. That's what we're iterating through. So we did that, and then use medication instance to access the ID. So we are passing in. So we're going to down here. We are going to call has records. So we'll say does we'll set it to a exist. We'll just set it to a variable called exist. We'll say has record, and in here we need to pass in the attribute. So that would be it would be medication ID, and then we will pass the medication instance.id. Let's do a quick, I want to just do something real quick. I want to just make sure that I can access the ID. So let's comment this out real quick. Cool, so we're getting the ID. We have access to the ID, good. Then we'll say pass that in, and then we want to pass in the illness medication collection. So let's go ahead and print and see if it's giving us the expected values. Yep, because there's nothing in the database, so they are all false. So now we want to create the record, and we want to create an if statement. If not exist, we want to here we would do illness classification dot create row. We need to query the database for the illness instance. So we will do illness dot query dot filter by, and we're going to filter by the name, and we're going to use the illness up here in here, and we're going to get the first match. And then we're going to pass in the illness instance and the medication instance from here. And so it should create the information. So it should create the record in the database. So we can delete this extra stuff. Before we do that, let's go ahead and print to make sure that we are getting the value we want for illness. Cool, we are getting the illness instances. And then we want to create it. So if we did this right, it should work. The only probably like it'll probably be better to get all the illnesses and then use the retrieve record function to find that illness instance. So collection. Well, before we do that, let's just see if this worked. If we get any errors. Has no attribute create row. Illness minute classification. Oh, we're using the wrong one. Illness medication. I don't know why I was thinking of classification. We got no errors. Let's check the database for illnesses medication. It got populated. Let's run it again to see if it checks. It does. Sweet. So it works. So now if the data already exists as it has, it will not add any duplicate records. I think the only change that I would probably make in this situation is get like the illnesses collection, because what we're doing here is we are hitting the database individually for each illness that exists. So the whole reason why we did this is to not hit the database individually like that. So I would probably do like illness.query.all and then use the retrieve record function, pass in the name as the attribute, the illness from here, and then pass in the illness collection. And so I think, let's just not run this real quick. If we were to print to make sure that it works the same, I think we can do like truncate table illness medications restart identity, and I think it removes it. Okay, so then if we run this real quick, yeah, we're still getting the illness instance. So delete that, and let's see, we have retrieve record, so we can do like this. And maybe like, since we're doing this 3 times, we can probably extract this into a function to where we can basically say like retrieve. We can do probably like def retrieve or get or say retrieve all records DB or something like that, right? It's just retrieve all records, pass in the model, and then we would just do return model.query.all. And so instead of having this in here, we would say retrieve all records and then pass in the illness medication model, and then do the same here and do the same here, and we'll delete the medication. Wait, sorry, hold on. We delete illness, and then here we delete medication. And so, yeah, I think that would still work. So let me just run this again. Cool. And we can look at our database, and the records are in there. What else would I do? Let's see. We could also extract this here into its own function and say, basically, we can do for illness medication and new illness medication items, and then we can go in here, because let me see, we want to do, I mean, like 2 loops isn't too bad, it's when you're trying, like, your nest, like, you have, like, right here, I would have another for loop, and then here I would end up having another for loop, and so, like, nesting for loop to avoid, like, doing, you know, probably create another function maybe, and I would say create record, and it will pass in the illness, medications, and then just extract all of this into here. And we would have all of this so that we won't have to pass in so many arguments. We would probably want this in here. Oops. Probably want this, that. And so in here we would just say create record, pass in the illness and medications. So we will just have this one loop, and then we'll say, okay, so you're running this function for each object in this database. Data structure. You're first converting the data, then you're looping through it, and then you're creating the record. And actually, probably name this create records in DB. So yeah, I mean, that is basically how I do it. We can delete all this now, and we have our goal accomplished. Now our database is populated. If we try to run the function again, there's no errors, and there's no repeated records. Sweet. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it wasn't confusing, and everything was pretty, clear on what I was doing throughout the whole thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.